councillors observing. I'm sure you've already had this mentioned to you, but please, just to keep clarity for the members of the public, please stay silent and let just the members of the committee or the speakers speak. But yeah, and obviously it helps to distinguish who's actually taking part in the vote as well. So thank you. The public who are coming in for the first application are being brought up, but we can probably start the other business to start.
Right, hello everyone. The first item on the agenda is the election of chair. So are there any nominations? I think your hand was up first. Yeah. Is that seconded? I second it. Yeah. So all those in favour of Councillor Harkness to be chair? 5. All those against? 1. So, yeah, Councillor Harkness, you're chair of the meeting.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for electing me as chair for this meeting. Obviously, usually the chair would have had a briefing beforehand on things. Obviously, I've seen what you lot have seen, so we will hopefully have a courteous meeting. And yes, so first, the next item is apologies for absence. Have you received apologies for absence?
Received apologies from Councillors Akhtar, Hurley, Pinder and Woodvine. Councillor Tarbuck is here as a substitute.
Okay, urgent business. Yes, urgent business. I'll pass on.
Thank you, Chair. So, councillors, as you're aware, the Constitution has a process by which a ward councillor can ask for a planning application to be referred to committee for a decision. That process is set out in the Constitution and includes a step where, after the referral request being made to me, I have to consult with the chair of planning committee. Notwithstanding, obviously, the fact that you as a committee have elected Councillor Harkness as chair this evening, the position of chair of planning committee and vice chair of planning committee has to be set by council in terms of the fulfilling what's in the Constitution. And of course, at the moment, that has not progressed, and there has been no chair or vice chair of planning committee selected by council. So the problem I face in trying to deal with referral requests is I can't fulfil the Constitution as it currently stands, and therefore be able to refer applications to planning committee when if I agree with the request. So what I've got on the screen there for discussion and hopefully for someone to propose a motion of one of the options for a vote tonight is 2 options of what I suggest we do as an interim measure until the council appoints a chair and vice chair of planning committee, to simply change paragraph 1.6 in a small way for each one. So just for the record, paragraph 1.6 currently says the Assistant Director for Planning, Transport and Housing Delivery, which is myself, will, in consultation with the chair or vice chair of the planning committee, confirm or reject the referral based on the significance of the development and validity of the planning reasons. So what I propose as 2 options is option A, that we change that slightly to say the Assistant Director for Planning, Transport and Housing Delivery will, in consultation with the member elected by the committee to be chair at the most recent planning committee, confirm or reject the referral. So obviously right now, for the next month until the next planning committee, that will be Councillor Harkness. Or option B, changing it to read where instead I will consult with 1 nominated member of the planning committee from each political group represented on the committee. So effectively, I think there are 6 groups represented on the planning committee. I would want 1 nomination of a member of this committee from each of those groups, and I would contact them all simultaneously when I have a referral request to get their view before I make a decision on a referral. So those are the 2 options that I propose. Obviously, you may have other ideas, but obviously open to discussion and motion.
Yeah.
So, two things now. So, first of all, it would be 6. So, I think I'm correct in saying that we have Labour, Reform, Liberal Democrats, and normally Conservative and Royton Independents. Sorry, it's 5. Sorry, Oldham Group as well. Sorry. So, yes, 6 groups represented on this committee. You would each group would nominate one person on this committee to be that person that I consult, and it's just those 6 that I consult. It's not a vote, so to speak, in terms of those 6. It's me consulting, getting your opinions. I make that decision then in light of those views.
Okay, does anyone else have any other comments or want to propose option A, B or any other? Councillor Chan. Okay, do we have a seconder? Okay, take a vote. Those in favour? Against? Okay, I think that's carried then. Option B.
Ask them to nominate.
Yeah, I think it would be useful. Shall we do that now? Would you like to nominate a member? Well, Liberal Democrats easy, as is only me. That'll be me. Josh for the Labour Party, Oldham Group, and Reform. Okay, thank you.
And we'll pick up with Conservatives.
And obviously there's no Conservative on here tonight, or Royton Independents. Okay, so we can pick up with those separately. Okay, thank you. Right, is there any other urgent business?
No.
Okay, so the next item is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest for this meeting? No, okay, fantastic. Public question time. Any public questions received?
None received, Chair.
Fantastic. Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting. Would anybody like to comment or propose those? Anyone who was perhaps at the last meeting? Maybe. And if not, anybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Proposed, recorded. Okay. Are we agreed? Okay. Fantastic. So the next item is item 7, which is St Paul's Church, Rochdale Road. I believe we've got members of the public who want to come in at this point. Is that right?
I think they're already in.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, that's fair enough then. Okay. So just for obviously new members and members of the public, obviously sometimes you're not going to agree with everything that's said, but obviously we ask people to be courteous. There will be an opportunity for for a member of the public to speak, an applicant and a ward member. So obviously the members of the public who are not happy with that, as I've got quite points to make and are not on the list, I suggest the best thing is to speak to one of those before they go up to speak, okay? Hopefully we can, have a good courteous meeting. Okay, so the first bit of the meeting, we will go to the officer who will do a report and point out those, talk about the application. Then we'll go on to if there is a member of an objector, and then the applicant, and then the ward member, and it'll be in that process. Obviously, before we go to the other speakers, after the officer's spoken, we will be able to, as a committee, ask questions to the officer, and then at each stage the committee members will be able to ask questions, and then we'll go to overall debate, and then obviously proposals of whether we want to approve or second the application. Obviously, I know some of these applications are quite emotive, and there's a lot of things going on. We have to consider planning grounds, as Peter said in training on Monday. And that can be quite difficult sometimes. There's lots of times where applications are really, really difficult for us. But of course, obviously, we need to have strong planning grounds to refuse an application. Otherwise, we would have to amend to approve. Okay, so without any further delay, I'll pass on to,
It's Steve.
Steve, okay. Then.
Just before Steve comes in, just to add something from my chair, just to clarify for everyone, this item 6 and item 7 are linked. It's a planning application with an associated listed building consent. So the presentation Steve will give will cover both. We'll then have a separate, first covering the planning application, looking at asking the speakers to speak and deal with that application, ending in a decision before we come back to the listed building consent. There has to be two separate decisions because there are two separate applications, but the presentation will be the same.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. As Peter's just alluded to there, the presentation relates to a full planning application and an associated listed building consent for an application at St Paul's Church in Shaw. The proposals seek consent for a partial reconstruction and repair of the remaining chapel and Sunday school buildings and restoration of the graveyard. As members may be aware, in terms of background, the building is a Grade 2 listed building. This site has a complex recent history. Despite its listed status, the chapel had fallen into a severe disrepair and was placed on the Historic England Building at-risk register in 2016. Following a partial roof collapse and continued structural deterioration, emergency works were undertaken. However, the building remained unstable. In 2019, structural engineers concluded that substantial demolition was the only means of addressing the risks to public safety. As a result, the chapel walls were reduced to approximately 1 metre above sea level, whilst causing substantial harm to the Grade 2 listed building. No alternative means of stabilisation were identified, and the works were supported on public safety grounds. Historic England's support for those works was given on the expectation that the chapel would be ultimately rebuilt in full. The current applicant advised during the process of assessing these applications that there was no legal obligation requiring the full reconstruction of the chapel when they purchased the building, just for your information, members. So in terms of application considerations, members will note there are two separate applications before committee, the full application and the listed building consent. The full application is made under the Town and Country Planning Act and requires consideration of the development plan and all material planning considerations relevant to the development. In this case, those include heritage impacts, amenity, highway considerations and ecology. The listed building consent application is made under the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act and considers the impact of the works on the listed building. The assessment of this application therefore concerned with the heritage merits of the proposal only. Whilst there are two separate applications before members, they relate to the same development. Members may already be very familiar with this site, but I thought it'd be useful to put up some pictures of the site so you can see the condition of the building. These pictures just illustrate the current condition of the site to help demonstrate the circumstances that I set out in slide 2 earlier. Members can see that the chapel has largely been reduced to low-level wall remains following the 2019 demolition works, with the Sunday School's building surviving to the rear. The photographs also demonstrate the extent to which the original chapel has already been lost and the poor condition of the remaining structure. These are more site photos, so these slides provide a further view of the site. Members will note that the surviving historic boundary railings, graveyard and remaining masonry evidence from the chapel as it originally stood. So we now come to the proposals. This slide just illustrates the principal elements of the proposed works, which are intended to bring the building back into use while securing the long-term preservation of the remaining historic fabric. The most significant element of the construction of a new permanent stone wall gable to the north elevation of the former chapel. This has been designed to reflect the building's historic character, whilst protecting surviving internal plasterwork and decorative features from the further deterioration. The scheme also proposes reconstruction works to the west gable wall up to 1 metre in height, which collapsed during more recent site clearance works. This will be rebuilt using salvage stone from the site, matching the appearance and detailing of the surviving structure wherever possible. Internal works and alterations are proposed to the Sunday School building, including replacements and reinstated door openings, reconstruction of previously removed staircase, and works to address damp issues and facilitate the reinstatement of the flooring. Externally, the graveyard would be cleared of overgrown vegetation and brought back into use, and this area would become a public publicly accessible peace garden. All graves and gravestones will be retained and protected, whilst the historic railings to the front of the site would also be repaired and restored. Overall, the proposals are focused on stabilising the remaining structure, safeguarding surviving historic features and securing its long-term future and occupation. So now we come to the harm and the benefits of the scheme. As you'll probably be aware, heritage and archaeology are the principal issues with both of these applications. Growth Lancashire, who act as the Council's heritage advisors, conclude, as you'll have seen from the committee report, that the development would result in substantial harm to the significance of the Grade 2 listed building. Their position is based on the fact that the proposals do not provide for the reconstruction of the chapel and would in effect consolidate the previous loss of the building. Whilst Growth Lancashire acknowledged that the physical works proposed as part of both applications, the works proposed to restore the building, when viewed in isolation would result in less than substantial harm, they conclude that when assessed holistically, taking account of the previous loss of the chapel, taking account of the previous loss of the chapel and the fact that the reconstruction is not proposed, the overall heritage outcome amounts to substantial harm. In archaeological terms, GMAS, who are the Council's archaeological advisors, welcomes the restoration of the burial ground as a peace garden. They conclude that subject to appropriate conditions, the development is acceptable in archaeological terms and would result in less than substantial harm to buried archaeological remains. And this is principally associated with groundworks required to facilitate the reconstruction of the northern gable. As set out in the committee report, whilst the demolition of the chapel was not undertaken by the current applicant and does not form part of these proposals as part of this application, officers have assessed the heritage impacts on a holistic basis, adopting a worst case scenario, if you like, and takes account of the permanent loss of the chapel together with the impacts of the works required to secure the viable reuse of the remaining building, which results overall in substantial harm. Where a proposal would lead to substantial harm, paragraph 214 of the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, requires that substantial benefits are demonstrated to outweigh that harm. In this instance, as set out in the committee report, it is considered that the scheme delivers substantial public benefits, including 1. The repair and partial restoration of a severely damaged Grade 2 listed building, securing its long-term retention. 2. The reintroduction of the building's use as a place of worship, delivering social and community value. 3. The creation of a publicly accessible peace garden, providing communal and heritage benefits. And 4. Economic and social benefits associated with construction activity and ongoing use of the site. Having undertaken the balancing exercise, officers conclude holistically that the substantial public benefits arising from the scheme outweigh the identified substantial harm. So there are other material considerations, as I alluded to earlier, associated with the full application. So I'll just turn to these briefly. In amenity terms, the application primarily relates to the restoration works. Environmental health have raised no objection, subject to conditions controlling construction impacts. In highways terms, the use of the building remains as a place of worship and no change of use is proposed. The main highway consideration therefore relates to construction traffic, which will be controlled through a construction management plan secured by condition. Finally, the proposed works have no unacceptable ecological impacts and the application is exempt from biodiversity net gain requirements due to the date on which the application was submitted. So in conclusion, we consider that the scheme would secure the stabilisation, repair and long-term retention of a remaining heritage asset, improve the appearance of the site, restore important historic features, bring the site back into active use and deliver meaningful public benefits. For these reasons, we conclude that the substantial public benefits of the scheme outweigh the identified heritage harm. Accordingly, and subject to the conditions set out in the committee report, approval is recommended for both applications. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Joyce.
Thanks, Councillor. It's probably more of a question for Wendy, actually, but when you mentioned that there's no highways requirements due to not having a change of use, obviously the chapel, I think, was last used in the 1970s, and there's been a significant increase in the number of vehicle movements that people use in accessing areas like places of worship and community spaces. So I was just wondering why we don't need to consider that, considering there has been over 50 years since that's happened?
In planning terms, the use of the site isn't changing, so we're only considering the restorative works associated with the listed building. And we're not considering a change of use in which highway impacts would be assessed if they were changing, because you need to assess the highway impact of that change of use. But because that remains the same and isn't required in this instance, then we wouldn't assess the highway impacts. We're purely assessing the restorative works proposed with the listed building.
Yep.
Hello, there was stained glass windows that was part of the building. Can I ask where they are currently at the moment, please?
We haven't got, I'm not aware of the location of that material at the time. There are plenty of planning conditions associated with the development to ensure that what they are replacing or putting on site will be agreed with the local planning authority and Growth Lancashire prior to any installation. So obviously the next question for us will be around the materials associated with the scheme. But in terms of the location of that material, I've not had any discussion with the applicant directly. Yeah, we can definitely ask the question, yes.
Okay, so any, Councillor Boots.
You said it's going to change back into a place of worship. What is the current status after 50 years of any place of worship in Shaw now, and will it be fully utilised if there's already amenities in place?
So in terms of, sorry, can you repeat the question, just so I can make sure?
So my understanding was that it's going to get turned back into a place of worship. It's been empty for a long while. So what is the current place of worship there, and is it adequate for what Shaw's already using?
Okay, so while the property has been empty for a while, the use has not changed. So in a planning sense, the use has always been a place of worship, and it still is and will be a place of worship. So from that point of view, we can't, it's not a change of use application. We can't consider the impacts of how the property is being used because it has permission for that already. So in terms of any infrastructure or amenities and services and what have you, that's all wrapped up in the use. And for example, if this was still retained by the Methodist Church and was being used by the Methodist Church, and they had an event that filled the property, they would be allowed to do that. And it's the same, no matter who the owner is, if they're using it as a place of worship, we cannot prevent them, and there's no planning basis to stop them from using it as a place of worship for the capacity of that building.
I think it's misunderstood. So you're saying it's a Methodist place of worship. So where have the Methodist place of worship been in Shaw in the interim since this has been closed?
I don't know. We wouldn't even ask that question because it's not relevant to the planning application.
Okay, Councillor Charles.
Just sort of following up on that point, where we're discussing the heritage, I think it's paragraph 9.49. It mentions that an identified public benefit of the scheme is the reintroduction of the building's use as a place of worship. So my question there is, in terms of looking at it from the heritage point of view, weighing against the substantial harm to the building as identified by Growth Lancashire versus the public benefit, do we have any identified lack of worship space in the area? Or because if there isn't an identified lack of worship space, then I don't see how we can say that that is a public benefit, because they're not adding to anything.
I see your logic. I think the way the report was written was meant more linking it to the previous point in terms of having a viable use for that building that is bringing the community benefit is a public benefit. It's not so much about whether there is a need for worship space or not. That's not something, again, under planning, that's not something we would expect an applicant to have to demonstrate. Obviously, freedom to expression of worship is an important, human right, and it's not for us to, as a planning authority, to say you've got enough worship space in the community. I think it's more, but as I say, the focus on the point was more around saying we're bringing, or this application is bringing, a building that is deteriorating back into an active use, which will help its maintenance. Obviously, without an active use, the building is likely to deteriorate further, and the listed building is likely to deteriorate.
I think then how the report's been written, I think, doesn't help make that point. I think because it says the reintroduction of the building's use as a place of worship, delivering social and community value. To me, reads it needs to be something that's going to be used or to have an identified sort of making a gap. Because if you just said reintroduction of the building's use, delivering like the building's use, like what you just said, that would read more like that would meet that test. But as it's written right now, I don't think it does meet the test. So that's why I was asking the question.
Through Chair, that's absolutely fine. I mean, we take that on board. Obviously, we've clarified it now, and that's what's important in the meeting. That's why we have these discussions. But yeah, and I think I'd simply say as well that, obviously, like I say, having a place of worship use that provides a social and community use as well, you know, regardless, is a benefit in itself, setting aside the heritage things as well. So it's not about need for it, it's simply a positive thing to have.
Okay, so I think the next stage we've got an objector, Dawn Bardsley, is that correct?
The next one.
Oh, right, sorry, that's the second one, sorry. Okay, so therefore it's the applicant, I think, if the applicant's here, Mr. Hussein Ahmed.
Yeah, so just to explain on this one, Chair, if I may, in terms of the applicant on this application and the objector to the next application, the linked one, unfortunately, for personal reasons, neither were able to attend tonight. And so given the particular circumstances of their situation, we, as an exception, we agreed that they could provide a written statement that Alan will read out on their behalf.
We'll move on. Why would we not provided these as written documents, either with the late list or with the report?
In the same way that, obviously, if an applicant was speaking, you wouldn't have a written document in front of you. We're trying to keep it as consistent as possible. It's almost, imagine Alan is the person who is speaking.
Yeah. So that essentially says, obviously,
yes,
in these both cases, we normally would be able to ask questions to the speakers. Obviously, it's not fair to ask Alan the questions on that. But if you have questions arising when we get to the debate stage to officers, obviously we can take them there as well.
Thank you, Chair. This is the statement. Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Committee and officers. My name is Mohammed Ahmed and I am the Secretary of the Board of Trustees of Muhammadiyah Masjid and Islamic Centre. On behalf of the trustees, I would like to express our sincere gratitude for the opportunity to have this statement read before the committee today. I apologise that I am unable to attend in person. The Muhammadiyah Masjid and Islamic Centre purchased the former St Paul's Methodist Church after it was placed on the market as a redevelopment opportunity. When we acquired the site, it had been left vacant and neglected for many years. During that time, the building's condition deteriorated significantly, resulting in the collapse of substantial sections of the chapel's roof and walls. Despite its condition, we saw far more than a derelict building. We saw a building of great historical significance, a landmark that had served the local community for generations and deserved the opportunity to have a future once again. From the very beginning, our intention has never been to erase its history, but rather to preserve it, protect what remains, and bring the site back into meaningful use as a valuable community asset. We believe that allowing the building to continue deteriorating would represent the greatest loss, not only to our organisation, but to the wider community and to the heritage of Oldham. The application before you today marks an important first step towards achieving that vision. It seeks permission to undertake essential works to stabilise and safeguard the site, including partially rebuilding the chapel walls where necessary, creating a secure enclosure to store the original salvaged stone for future conservation work, restoring the graveyard and refurbishing the historic iron railings, and constructing a permanent gable wall to the former Sunday school building. These works will make the structure weatherproof, prevent further deterioration and restore the original entrance. These are not simply construction works. They are conservation works that will help preserve what remains of this important historic building while laying the foundations for its long-term future. Throughout this entire process, we have worked closely with Oldham Council, planning officers, conservation officers and all other relevant parties. We have listened carefully to the professional advice we have received and have sought to ensure that every aspect of our proposals reflects that guidance. We remain fully committed to this collaborative approach. We want every stage of the restoration to be carried out properly and sensitively to the highest possible standard, ensuring that the building's heritage is respected while creating a safe and sustainable future for the site. As a charitable organisation rooted in the local community, our ambition is simple. We want to breathe new life into a building that has stood empty for far too long. We want it to become a place that benefits local residents, supports community activities, preserves an important part of Oldham's heritage and remains an asset for future generations. We sincerely hope the committee will recognise our genuine commitment, our willingness to work alongside the council and our desire to preserve this historic building rather than lose it. We respectfully ask you to support this application and allow us to continue restoring the former St Paul's Methodist Church site in a way that honours its past while securing its future for the benefit of the community. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So next stage is we move on to Councillor Hinds, who will have 5 minutes to address the committee, and then obviously members can ask questions to Councillor Hinds afterwards.
Would you want to do the...
Or do you want to do the
applicant as well?
That is the applicant. The objectors
next one? Okay, sorry. So Councillor Hinds.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, I'd just like to highlight that this is a planning application regarding a building, okay? It's not about who prays there or what God they pray to. That's a matter for them, although it has been a place of worship for over 230 years. Now, this reads to me as straight out the pages of a Greek tragedy. And the real tragedy is why we're sat here and that building is in that condition today. And the people who are accountable for that are not here to explain themselves. So I just wanted to talk briefly, because I've been involved in this for the past 2 years, of how we've got to this stage. Briefly, because I've only got minutes, the building collapsed. It was then made safe. It was then sold. The new owners came in and they acted, in my view, recklessly. One of the officers said they were collapsed walls. No, they weren't collapsed. They were bulldozed with some illegal works taking place by the new owners. That is a fact, okay? We then got an enforcement action on them to prevent them doing any serious damage. Now, fortunately, we managed to sit down with the owners, get them to understand the responsibilities of taking on a Grade 2 listed building and work to a pathway to, at very least, preserve and maintain our heritage and culture, because heritage is everything. It's who we are, okay? And the main thing for us was preserving the site. If anybody is under any illusions that this site is going to get significantly rebuilt to its former glory, well, they need to find £15 million, and that ain't going to happen anytime soon. So I was involved with Peter with it. So the main thing to do was to preserve what we've got. This application does that, okay? It makes them put right what damage they caused, okay, in the right way, in association with the right building equipment, materials, etc., etc., etc. It also has its added features in terms of preserving the site in a way people can go and enjoy it, okay? Stonehenge is a ruin, but we don't bulldoze it, do we? We maintain what it is for that effect. So the main thing is, I want to take the argument away, because I don't think it's been reported to very kindly in the press about this sort of like generating hysteria over it, who's worshipping in it, what they're worshipping, this, that and the other. There are serious concerns for me about parking and traffic management, but as described, they're not material in this case. However, I do think all ward councillors for sure should be petitioning either for permit parking or at the very least enforcement. So the other thing I would say as well, it's not just a preservation of a building we're talking about here. There are 300 people buried under that chapel, okay? People who lived, worked and died in Shaw, okay, and I think it's important this memorial garden reflects that. So this application, if passed, does what we can do to stabilise, secure and in a sense police the site, because it will obviously be monitored and ensured that what actions they do is done in the correct manner, okay, and I think in one respect I've been disappointed with the owners. But I'm also grateful for them because they have took on a massive responsibility. But as I say, responsibility comes with responsibilities. And this application, I think, demonstrates that. So I would be asking members to think of the building, think of the preservation of the building, and think of the 300 people who are buried underneath. This is what we're talking about preserving. So I'd ask you to please approve. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions of Councillor Ince? Yes. Go ahead.
Mine is working perfectly. Just a question about what on what you've said about the applicants. I understand that's not material fact here. However, you did say that there were some issues previously. Yes. You, community, a group of people has spoken to the applicants or the new owners, should I say. Had they stand corrected? Did they comply with your with the conditions of the community? Were they forthcoming?
Would you like to put your mic on, Councillor?
Sorry, Chair. Obviously, certain things can become a motive. And I want to talk as a resident as well, not just a councillor. There is a significant population in Shaw of Muslim worship. Their existing masjid, if that's the right word, forgive me ignorance, is a terraced house and has not been fit for purpose for a number of years to accommodate the amount of people that have been worshipping there. And I think that's why they looked for a new site. I think they bought the site. I think they were naive in terms of what responsibilities they were taking on. And I think they did act recklessly. I sat down with them as a councillor, and I also sat down with them as the town leader of the town council at the time to try and get an understanding and generate some sort of community cohesion, because they are the owners, you know, and they can do quite a lot in that building. There's no laws to say they can't pray there or this, that and the other. But specifically, it was my viewpoint that we had to work with the owners to secure the site, to secure the future of the site. And I think there's been quite a lot of he said, she said, and oh, they should just rebuild it. But the practicality is, it's just not feasible at this moment in time, okay?
You mentioned naivety, you know, with
it's
them
my
taking up
personal
the...
view.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think when you're taking on such a big project, with knowing that that's a Methodist church that's been there for hundreds of years, and you've got a graveyard peace garden, you know exactly what you're taking on. You know exactly what you're doing within that area and how you're going to preserve that. And yes, you're right. This application does put them right, because they've got certain conditions and material facts that they have to use, also respecting the graveyard and peace gardens that are there. And that is my big concern. Yeah. Doesn't matter what religion you come from.
Absolutely. We
respect the dead, and especially in the Islamic religion, which I come from. So that would be my biggest concern, no matter who's, you're buried there. But I'm glad that the applicants are, doing, like you said, agreeing to what you're saying, and also this legitimises it and makes them, responsible.
I think, just to add to what you've just said, I think
it's a shame that applicants are not here to ask questions.
Yeah. I think what we also need to be mindful of, if there isn't a planning application that's been approved for these works to be maintained, to be done, then the site becomes uncertain. And as I've sat in that chair, as I've seen sites in Saddleworth that have lost the protection because there's not been any sort of plan to progress it. And once a site loses its protection, then it's basically a blank canvas. And I'm sure there is nobody in this room, whether they be local councillors or committee members, who would want to be a part of that that outcome.
Okay, at this point, I'm just going to bring Peter in. He just wants to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to make a point of clarification, obviously it's perfectly understandable why matters such as what has happened in the past, in terms of what the actions of what the owners may or may not have done, and whether they're naive or not, or whatever it might be. Just to obviously be clear, from the point of view of determining this application, whatever may have happened before is not something that we can weigh into the balance in deciding this application. The fact that the council, yes, started an enforcement action, a legal action, but obviously that was halted while we worked through the application and tried to solve issues this way. That is not relevant to the application before us. As we talked about on Monday, who the applicant is, their character, their behaviour is not something we can take into account in a planning decision. I just wanted to make that clear for everyone.
You're always a voice of reason, Peter.
Okay, Councillor Charters, got a question for Councillor Inservie.
Yep. So thank you for sort of giving a bit more background around the site and the applicant's previous location they were at, because I think that's helpful for us in determining some of that public, like what I mentioned earlier about the public benefit. I'm going to ask you a really easy question, Councillor Hintz. Based on what you know of the application and the grade 2 listed, do you think that the benefits outweigh the harm?
I think definitely the benefits in terms of bringing it into use. I think if it's not brought into use, a significant risk of further deterioration and potential health and safety concerns. And I think the realistic approach, whereas we're not talking about the building realistically being completely rebuilt, this definitely, as a resident, I will say, because it's currently a complete eyesore, and it's in a very, very predominant place within Shaw, I think they do outweigh, and I think it's trying to get the ashes out of a fire.
Would it be fair to say it's the least worst option?
It's the least worst option. Yeah, that's a very concise way of putting it.
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
Hi, Councillor Lawrence. Can I just ask, in the area, what would be the effect of the amount of people going? The fact that there's only 24 car spaces for parking, and what's the area around it like for driving and parking?
Yeah, I mean, every town centre has its problems with parking. I mean, I am answering the question to you, although it's not a material condition. The site is currently being used as a majid, so it's in use now. They're operating legally in that sense. I've had numerous complaints in the local area with parking, and like I said, which I've reported, and I suggest outside of this decision, I think the ward councillors for Shaw should take a joint approach to ensuring that the streets are not double parked during the Friday prayers, as it might be, and there's some sort of enforcement action in place, because there is sufficient parking in Shaw. It just seems to be lazy, if that's even a thing to say. But yeah, like as been touched on by Peter, irrespective of who's in it or whatever, you still run the risk of so many parking. You with me?
You wouldn't be concerned about 300 people being there with cars all over the pavement and everywhere else?
Well, I've just highlighted that. Yes, I am concerned about parking. It's obviously an issue, but it's not an issue related to this planning application. So you couldn't refuse it on the basis of parking, because that's not a material grounds to refuse it on. However, what I'm saying is, I do acknowledge the issue of parking, and like I say, I think the solution for the parking lies with either permitting or enforcement. And if they were applied, I don't see there'd be an issue. And I don't know where you got the 300 from.
What they were saying, people would be coming 300 to 500 potential, especially on Fridays. That was what's in the booklet. Yeah.
Peter will just clarify that point.
Yeah, so that reference in the committee report is reporting an objection. So it's not the council's position or necessarily a confirmed factual position. It's the nature of the objections, was concerned about 300 to 500 people attending.
I understand that, but we all know that there could be potentially up to 300 going to a place of worship.
Well, there could be 1,000, there could be 10,000.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, but how do you quantify that? Well, I don't know. Do you?
I would assume.
Okay, we've got obviously a difference of opinion there. So yeah, the material planning consideration would be the impact on the highways rather than the parking. I think correct. Peter.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, we raised highways for just in terms of the presentation and to talk about it because there were objections about highways. Ultimately, in terms of the application before us, highways is not a relevant issue because the use is not changing. So
Why is highways not an issue with that, by the way, just for context?
Because the application before us is about the development works to the structure, ultimately. It's not about the use of the building. As Councillor Hinter said, the use is actually ongoing now. And we couldn't stop that, and we wouldn't stop that because it's got permission for a place of worship. So things around highways access, parking and what have you are all linked to the use, not to the development or construction works to preserve the listed building, which is what this application is ultimately about. The only highways matter of potential relevance is about construction traffic, which of course we cover in a condition.
Okay, Councillor Charters.
Yeah, so it is actually on the construction traffic side of things. So I've got family in Shaw. I go past this site quite a lot. I know the road's quite narrow. Do you have any concerns around the construction management that's potentially as a condition already that we can look to address? And I do know that there's not an insignificant amount of council-owned public car parks in the area. So I think one thing we could be doing, or as your suggestion about ward councillors, is working with the community to maybe take more of an active travel route to going to pray and going to use that centre. You know, parking over near Asda, parking on Westway, walking over. But yeah, just on that narrow streets thing, is there anything you've got concerns about on that we can address?
There is. Thank you, Councillor Charters. There is concerns relating to obviously the construction side of things and the access. And this, that and the other. But that is a sort of the nature of any sort of... I mean, currently in Shaw, we've got some roadworks going on near Aldi, which are a complete nightmare. And if you live, obviously, on Refuse Street or around that area, that's having a significant impact on your day-to-day. Unfortunately, it is a temporary measure, and I would welcome anything that could be done to ease residents suffering in the short term. And I think, and I think what would be helpful as well would be the current occupiers engaging with local residents. I mean, they will be obviously seeing this, and I imagine, and I would ask them to address the parking issue on a Friday, and also work with residents to see, when this, keeping them informed of what's happening and when.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Councillor, you mentioned that you mentioned 15 million to restore it completely. Is that based on a previous application that's fallen down, or is it a guess?
Yeah, so that was just... So obviously, when we sat down with the owners, we looked at blue sky thinking, and what the plan was originally was to get the town council involved, the Shaw Town Council, to work with the owners, and the original plan was to maybe in some way the town council take ownership of the chapel front with a view to turning it into a memorial garden, and it would be owned by the public then, yeah. And we had some preliminary discussions with planning officers and heritage people, and that was kind of like the ballpark figure they give us. And obviously that is way up beyond any means of a town council. So we'd have to be looking at external funding, etc., etc. Now, them avenues might be open still, but what I would say is obviously we've got such a heritage of listed buildings that are in decay with limited money. So it is very, very unlikely, unless you're going to get some benefactors to come along and restore it. So that was it. Obviously things have changed, but I'm extremely pleased from what the new owners have done. They've actually added some things onto the application which they didn't need to do, which is obviously the railings and stuff like that, and obviously the guarantee it will be a community space, so it won't be locked off or anything, and it'll be something that's managed by them. So that's where we are.
Okay, thank you. So we now need to sort of make a decision on the full planning application. Then we'll come back to do the listed building consent, where we've got an objector's statement to be read out, and then Councillor Hinds again. So we're now moving on to the debate for the full planning application. Councillor Charters.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, and I've mentioned when I spoke to Councillor Hinds, I have quite significant concerns that I don't think this application meets the test of the NPPF in terms of the potential benefits outweighing the harm done to a Grade 2 listed building. I think it's very important, especially in towns like Oldham and Shaw and Royton and all the surrounding towns in the borough, that we do protect our heritage. Now, I do think it is regrettable that the previous work that's resulted in the demolition of the old chapel has happened. I know we can't take that into consideration here, but I am quite concerned about the comments from the heritage advisors around the complete lack of the total loss of the old chapel. And I was wondering, I don't know what we can do in terms of condition wise, and I know it says we can't ask for a full rebuild, but I'm thinking, is there something we can do to protect the idea that maybe in the future we do get, you know, as Councillor Hinds said, a potential benefactor who might want to spend 15 million quid rebuilding it. I'd like there to be somewhere for them to rebuild it if they could. Is there anything we can do on that? I'm not too sure, but I think that's the main concern in terms of planning terms, is around that heritage test, because the report doesn't, while the report offers a view, it doesn't sort of give a quantifiable figure in terms of how we should weigh that up, and I think as a subjective test it doesn't necessarily fully pass the smell test for me.
Okay, Peter.
Okay, so I think a few things in there. So first of all, in terms of, you know, could we place something, a condition or otherwise, on this application that somehow leaves the door open, if you like, to the chapel to be fully rebuilt at some point? We have to assess the application that's before us. So in a strict sense or direct sense of what you're saying, no. What we have got, and what is hopefully clear in the report, is obviously the materials on site, which were there when the chapel collapsed in 2019. They were stored on the site, and the owners assure us they are still there. So, and it's part of how that space where the chapel was will be used, is to store that material still. So there is. I'm not saying I can't be sure. Obviously, I can't know whether all the material is still there in the sense of what happens when a building collapses. But there is a significant amount of material that would be there and able to be reused were something to come forward about rebuilding or partially rebuilding the chapel. So that element of it is there. I've lost train of thought a little bit now in terms of, remind me a little bit of...
Just before I remind you of the other bit, so what you're saying is that, because I know the heritage assessment said it would, passing this would amount to permanently closing that door. You're saying that's not necessarily the case, first of all. I'm not saying it's not the case, or it is the case, just not necessarily.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think the full rebuild of the chapel as was is probably not likely, because I don't imagine all the material survived.
Yeah, of course.
Could you rebuild it in a way that is sympathetic to how it once was? Quite possibly.
Right, okay.
If someone's got enough
that
money.
was the question I was asking there. The other bit was around the test on the NPPF.
Yeah. So I totally understand what you're saying, and this very much is, we were discussing this in the office earlier, this is very much the type of application where we've talked about before about it is subjective. It is about a judgment, and I'll be quite frank, it's not an easy judgment in a situation like this. It really isn't. So obviously the language that's used on a heritage point of view is deliberately quite harsh, quite strong. You know, there's substantial harm, and that's right. there is substantial harm, because the chapel, as it currently stands, will never be rebuilt, or is unlikely to be rebuilt. So that's why the substantial harm is there. Even despite that substantial harm, what as officers our view is that bringing that building back into a viable use, repairing what can be repaired and preserving it. So don't forget, for example, right now, effectively the southern elevation of the Sunday school, which was the internal north wall of the chapel originally, has gradually been deteriorating over time since the roof collapsed, because it's very difficult to protect that. I mean, there is polythene trying to protect it, but it's very difficult to protect that from the elements. This proposal involves a whole new facade that will allow a space to ensure that what was an internal wall is protected and can be maintained, because there are some very nice features on that wall, but protect it by having a new facade to the south, projecting onto Rochdale Road to enable that protection of the facade and the use of the property. And as Councillor Hinton said, things like the Peace Garden and what have you is a really nice feature to bring in. So from that point of view, and weighing in the fact that without interventions such as this, it will only get worse, as officers, we do consider that there is substantial public benefit to outweigh the substantial harm.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Do we have anybody who wants to make a proposal for this application? Move to approval. Do we have a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Sheen. Okay, all those in favour? Okay. Against? I think was that
4 and 3.
4 and 3. Okay, so that's
You abstained.
yeah. So, okay, so is that approved then? Okay, sorry, I missed the. I didn't see who on that Thursday. Okay, so that part's approved. We now move on to the listed building consent. We have an objector statement to be right, which I think is. Are you doing that, Alan? Okay.
Yes, Chair. This is from Dawn Bardsley, St Paul's Heritage Group in Shaw. Whilst we all wish for a viable solution to the church, there are still some issues with the application. We are in receipt of emails from Joanne Barmforth, Conservation Officer with the Methodist Church. One email dated the 13th of September 2024 stated, when the Methodist Church sold the building to the owners, the stained glass windows were in situ in the Sunday school. Miss Barmforth also stated that the new owners were responsible for them, along with other artefacts which did not reach Holy Trinity Church, as confirmed by Reverend Katie Cunliffe, which can be clarified in paperwork. We have a written statement from a resident of Chapel Street, Shaw, who witnessed the owners removing the stained glass windows. When asked about where the windows were going, the owners said, "Put somewhere safe." Artefacts not found, which were on site after the sale: Light of the World glass wallpiece by William Holman Hunt, 2 brass plaques naming World War I fallen heroes, Anthem for Doomed Youth, large stained glass window with 2 matching wooden plaques. Regarding the Keystone Consultancy Statement and Desk-Based Assessment, page 7, item 1.2.2 states, for the most part demolished. The owners drove a JCB into the grounds and knocked down walls, knowing this was a Grade 2 listed building. They were ordered to cease work when it was reported to the police by local councillors. This was June 2022, and there are witnesses and documented photographs. Twice the owners were summoned to court in Liverpool, and twice they did not attend. In October 2024, the report from court specified the following: the trustees have a 6 to 12 month time frame to rebuild the wall mistakenly knocked down. S. Rawat and A. Shah from OMBC agreed to these conditions with the owners. 2 years later, no work has been done. The plans have the words temporary scattered throughout. What will eventually be built in the place where the temporary walls are? Can a planning application be passed using the words temporary? For the owners to say they did not realise the full implications of owning a Grade 2 listed building does not absolve them of their duty to maintain and reinstate the building. The traffic problems will, and already are, impacting residents. There will be increased traffic congestion and pollution. To place a car park on a very busy junction is unfathomable. Not at any time have the owners consulted the residents. The spokesman for the masjid said on camera they are hoping to welcome 500 people to prayer. Where will these people park? Currently there are over 200 praying on Friday afternoon. The fire regulation limit is 150, clarified by Martin Scholes, Fire Safety Inspector for GM Fire and Rescue. The ground under the chapel ruins has palisade graves which were made from wood and would never withstand the weight of pallets of stone. The construction bore the weight of the building through the arches and pillars. If ground investigations show the ground is too weak, what will be the plan going forward? When the tomb of the Weeder family is located under the ruins, what will happen to it? The Weeder family have a square named after them in Shaw. This application needs to be handled delicately and with compassion for the families of the deceased who are buried within the curtilage of this land. 401 graves, 98 of them babies. These are still religious grounds of the Christian community of Shaw and Crompton.
I think at this stage, obviously, the applicant's not here. The objector's not here, so we can't obviously ask questions at that point, but we will be coming to the debate where I think that's probably the appropriate time. Councillor Hinz, you're down to speak for the listed building consent. Would you like to take that time?
Yes, I mean, it's quite a lot to digest in there. And I think if you extrapolate what's relevant, obviously that was covered really by the initial planning application. Look, this is a significant part of our heritage, and it's like I say, I think it's over 200 and I think it was 1711 or something like that when it was first there, and it's a resting place of many people. Now we're getting into the realms of where artifacts are, where, you know, stained glasses and this, and obviously these things are important. And I find it a bit hard to comprehend, if I'm honest, of when the building was sold, there wasn't some sort of engagement with the community to say, look, we've got these, it contains these cultural things, which are significant, because there doesn't seem to be any lack of management or control of them. And I can't get into a speculative comment of where these things are, what they are, or who they are. And I think we touched on before that as part of the planning application, if I'm right, you were going to obtain a list of items. Is that correct? So until that list is obtained, I don't think we know where we are. And I don't think it's helpful at this stage, even if there may be some truth in this, to speculate what's happened with what's there. So yeah, I do take on board quite a lot of concern. Like I say, and my main motivation for being here is obviously to secure the future of the building, which, as you've passed, may lead to future enhancement of the site. And I think, you know, I think the other thing I would say is I think the owners should be forthcoming with the community, either through the local council or local councillors, and you know, highlight exactly what they've got and where it is. I mean, there's a lot of statement in this. There's a lot of things said in this statement, but they're not really backed up with, you know, tangible evidence of whatnot. So it's more hearsay. But I do think we should be mindful of these artefacts if they are there, and all attempts should be made to locate them and preserve them. Thank you.
Okay, is there any further questions for Councillor Hinz? No? Okay, Councillor Charters, I think you had a comment.
I think Councillor Hinz has touched on what I was going to say, which was there's some things in that statement which, you know, on the face of it, are quite worrying. I just wanted to hope that the council has taken some of those concerns on board and hopefully have got some answers to some of the things that's been mentioned. Because I think fundamentally, like Councillor said about getting the list of things that may have been removed and hopefully stored. Like they've said that someone said they're keeping it safe. That would be ideal if they've been kept somewhere safe for future use once the building has been restored. But I think just some of the things that have been mentioned, I just hope have been taken on board. Hopefully you had it in enough time to be able to take that on board as part of the recommendations, but that was just what I was going to ask. I wasn't going to ask, I was more just wanted to make a comment on that.
At this stage, yeah, I think we've come back to that stage. Is there any further comments on the application? Okay. Would anybody like to make a proposal? Somebody's going to have to. Okay. Are you going to make a proposal? What's your proposal? A proposal to approve. Do we have a seconder? You're going to second, Josh? Okay, okay. So those in favour of approval for the listed building consent? That's 1, 2, 3, 4. All those against? Okay. And that means that I have the casting vote, doesn't it? Which I'm going to go for against, obviously. Do we have anyone who wants to propose refusal? Okay, I will.
Just before we go into that,
go on.
We've just passed the planning application, but now we're going to potentially refuse unlisted building consent. I'd just like to know from Peter what the way forward is going to be if that happens.
Yeah, this is quite difficult now, actually, because it's very unusual for when you have a planning application with a listed building consent alongside each other, because they're connected, that one be approved and one be refused. Obviously, the same heritage matters are being considered in both applications, and the so obviously, with the committee having approved the planning application in light of those heritage matters, to then refuse the listed building consent on the same heritage matters, I would be very concerned about how that might appear to a planning inspector if this went to appeal, and the resulting potential costs for the council. Obviously, if both had been refused, that would have been a different matter. But obviously, with one having been approved, and if the second one is then refused, it puts the council in a very difficult position, I would suggest.
Okay, so my comment on that, why I was, I think for the listed building side of things, perhaps you would say that the heritage side of things would carry more weight in the balance than maybe on the other side. Obviously, I'd stand on the other bit, so that would be my point. But obviously, we've now got to a point where we've approved the previous application. We can't go back and approve the second one. So I'm going to propose refusal on the grounds of, as Grove Lancashire have said, that of the substantial harm to the Grade 2 listed building. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Is that Councillor Tarbuck? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Those in favour of refusal? Those against? Casting vote, so I will say that application is refused. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll have a 5-minute adjournment to.
Oh, sorry. Yes. If there is an appeal.
Yeah, okay. So before we continue on that, if in the event of an appeal for the listed building consent, we need a representative of the committee to speak against, to speak in favour of our refusal. Do we have a volunteer for that? Okay, looks like that's me. Okay. Right, we're going to take a short adjournment to obviously swap members of the committee, and also we've got, just to have a short break to go to the toilet and things like that. I think before we do that, though, if we can, I think Alan just wants to pop in.
Just to make a point to members, if you're sat on the committee, you shouldn't be communicating or passing messages for people who aren't sat on the committee. I noticed that you were communicating with the two councillors behind you. You shouldn't have any communication with them on whether it's to do with what's up before the committee or not. You shouldn't be communicating with anybody else, because that gives the impression that you're being told something, that you've got extra knowledge that the rest of the committee haven't. So you should only have, what you should be listening to is what's in front of the committee.
Sorry, as a new member, I do apologise for that, but there was no way shenanigans going on whatsoever. That had been discussed way before.
We perhaps should have mentioned it at the training on Monday. But yes, if you're sat,
I was going to say that.
If somebody offers you a piece of paper from the public or whatever, no. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have a 5-minute break now. Okay. continue now. Okay, so for the next application, obviously we've got some new members of the public in, so I'll just point out so the way the process is. So the first part will be we'll get an officer report where they will talk about the application, and then we will move on to the number of speakers. So we have an objector, we have the applicant, and we have a ward member who wishes to speak. I just want to make clear, obviously, that the planning committee have to consider things on planning, material planning considerations, and some things, sometimes it's quite difficult because we might not like an application, but we do have to sort of consider those particular planning material planning considerations, and some things which some things are not that. Okay, so I will ask members of the public, obviously you might not like everything you hear, but if you can direct any, make sure that the relevant speakers, if you're for or against, if you've got any comments, then make sure that they're aware of those before we start, okay? Before they come up to speak. So if you do require a quick word with the objector, I'll leave a couple of minutes for you to perhaps have a conversation with them to make sure all those points are going to be mentioned, okay? But obviously, please, if we can just remember that it's the committee members who speak, and it's a meeting in public, but not a public meeting. Okay, so we'll now move on to the officer report.
Thanks, Chair. This application is for a change of use of an existing building from part agricultural, part B8 to a use class E, Children's Day Nursery with new car parking at Hilltop Farm, Healds Green in Chadderton. The application has been called in by former Councillor McLaren due to the level of public interest. This call-in has now been maintained by Councillor Brownridge. The location of the site is shown on screen, and it is located on Heights Lane within the centre of Healds Green. The proposed site plan is shown on the next slide, with access from Heights Lane shown to the north, and there is also a proposed access point to the south, which will be shown on the next slide. The proposed floor plans, elevations and site plan are shown on the next slides. The floor plan here also shows there will be a children's play area outside on the side elevation of the building. The children's nursery is proposed to offer 11 new jobs and provide capacity for 50 children once full. The site lies within the Hilltop Farm complex with existing vehicular access onto Heights Lane. The site lies within the green belt, and the following slides now show site photos from last week covering the access points and surrounding roads. The application has received no objections from consultees subject to conditions set out in the report. The application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in the committee report, and members' attention is drawn to the late list where condition 8 has been edited due to a minor drafting error, and one new condition is proposed relating to the retention of the car parking areas. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, questions to the officer? Okay, we'll move along. I think we've got 3 here, so we'll move on, start on this side.
Thank you. Could we just pull the site plan up again, the full one? Just because I've got some concerns around the drop-off area that it mentioned. I couldn't work out which one that was on the original plan. Was that the one at the top or the bottom? Was it that one, or is it the one to the south?
Yeah, so we've got a drop-off point being created at the northern point, and then we've also got, if you...
So is the drop-off was it 6 cars at the top?
4 or 5. Yeah, the drop-off point for parents is at the top, and then the car parking area shown to the south of the site.
That's the staff. Okay. Thank you. I'll leave it for now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
It was a similar question to councillors. So the staff parking got the bottom there. Is that where the turning point for the parents is going to be, or because I can't tell how it's linked? Where you got the 9 cars, is it? Is that just for staff?
So I'll explain if I can the parking arrangements. So at the bottom, that's predominantly for staff. So they'll park there during the day. The area, however, in real life is quite open. So if parents do want to park there, there is room for them to park there. But this is just the more official drawing. There's nothing to stop them parking there. And there's a safe pedestrian route. If you look at the green line, the zigzaggy one, that's the safe pedestrian route from that car park to the site. And then at the top of the drawing, we've got the official parking area for parents. And again, we've made sure that there's a safe route for children and their parents to walk from the cars, but also from the lane to the main building of the site. Sorry, the main entrance to the building.
Councillor Sheen.
Thank you, Chair. Again, sorry, I'm going to ask you again about the parking. So you say that is staff car parking and drop-offs for parents or can park. But if they do park, and I've got young children, I know it could be a 2-second drop, or it can take an hour for a nice child to stay in there and you'll be parking for a hell of a long time. Will that not block access for other cars that are parked there? And again, where is that turning point for parents to then drop off, take the children in and then move their cars? What I'm trying to get at is, will it not block other cars? Because how big is that turning point then? Thank you.
The car park at the top has got a clearly defined turning area. So it's, I think, when we say turning point and drop-off area, they're often sort of a circular thing. This isn't. This is a small car park at the top of the drawing. And if you see, there's like a T shape. That's it. So that would be the turning area. But actually, you've got the parking spaces and it'll be a quick turnover. It won't be a quickish. I know what you've just said about dropping children off. It'll be a quickish turnover for parents to drop their children off. And also the car parking area at the bottom is much more expansive. So if I was a parent dropping off there, I would probably use that because there is a proper turn you can manoeuvre.
If I can just add to what Wendy's saying, just because I think I'll turn it on its head a little bit in the sense of what we are required to do through the planning application is ensure there is an appropriate drop-off and parking space area for parents. That's what's on the screen. If you can go back to the previous one, the area that's kind of normally designated for staff is part of the wider site. The Hilltop Farm site has a riding school on it. I think there's still a few commercial businesses on there as well, I think. So it is private land that we have very little control over, that at the moment anyone could pull in and park in various different ways and potentially, like you say, maybe even block an area. Unfortunately, we can't control driver behaviour. So all we're pointing out is that it may well be that some parents do use the southern entrance and pull in where the staff are parked, hopefully in a way that doesn't block. But they don't need to because we provided a parent drop-off area at the north. So they've provided with our guidance.
Thank you. Councillor Tarbuck first and Councillor Bill.
Thank you, Chair. It's a nursery school and you're expecting parents to do a drop-off. Nursery school children don't get dropped off. The cars park up, the kids get out and they walk the kids to the gate. there's not enough parking there to do that, and there's the drop-off is, to my idea, a bad idea, having experienced this at the school my children go to. It's chaos. So you're saying it's a drop-off for nursery kids? Is that what your plan is?
When we say drop-off, we mean as in you pull up for a short period, take your child in,
right,
and drop them into the nursery in terms of, okay, I've had children as well, and that's what you do. You pull up, you get the kids out, you take them into the nursery, hand them over to the staff, and you go on your way. So I appreciate sometimes it takes a little bit longer than others. It depends on the situation or the child. But again, in terms of the number of children that are going to be at the nursery, the fact that the arrival times will be staggered, they won't all be coming at once because it's a nursery, not a school. You know, we've worked through that, and with the area to the south, which I say it's open and people do use already in various different ways, we're content that there is sufficient space for cars to pull in for a short period of time and drop their child into nursery.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Can I just confirm this location? I was looking at the pictures. Is this the Cherry Park Road where you drop down the hill and there's the pub that's quite heavily used at weekends on the right? Is it the Church Inn? Yeah, that's quite heavily used at weekends. I have been down there a few times, and on a sunny weekend that road is manic with people going to the pub. Is that the same road that is this one on?
I think, yeah, so it's Kilnhill Lane, isn't it, that comes off from Sheridan, and the Church Inn is off to the right of Church. You turn right to Church Inn, off Kilnhill Lane, and you go straight on to this property.
So does the road still narrow?
Just to add in terms of obviously what you said about the pub being busy on the weekend, we're talking about a nursery.
I'm just working the traffic, because in the I've not been there for a long time, and I've tried to look on there. The road comes down to, and it narrows then into a single lane. Yeah, is that still the case? It goes into a single lane, and then it's a single lane all the way down then to the very end, and there's residents on there as well. Is that the same road?
Yeah, it is single lane in places. The best route would be to use Kilnhill Lane and Heights Lane, because that is wider. It's a rural area, and there's no scope for us to have the highways improved because there isn't the room to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Charles, did you want to come back in?
It had a completely separate point that's nothing to do with cars. Section 10 of the report mentions impact on the green belt. It says that there will be hard surfacing playground, which does not give rise to any material impact on the green belt. I'm confused by that because I thought if you're tarmacking somewhere, that counts as you getting rid of some green space. So could you just explain that one to me, because that doesn't sit in my understanding of the green belt.
You're partially right in terms of when you look at impacts on the green belt and you talk about visual amenity. You talk about visual amenity in one element. So obviously where you've got something just being done at the surface, you're not impacting the openness from the point of view of the visual amenity. But yes, you're right, development is taking place in terms of you are doing works to the ground. So I think the report acknowledges that, saying it would be considered an engineering operation, but that kind of engineering operation to serve a proposal like this is not going to have a material impact ultimately on the green belt, in the sense of truly harming or significantly harming the openness of the green belt.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jackson.
So I know the area quite well. Have the highways looked at the routes in? Because most people are going to use the Kilnhill Lane, knowing the area, rather than the other routes. Has that been looked at? Because that road can't really take much traffic at the moment, never mind 30 cars in the morning, every morning.
Go through in detail how I assessed it now, would you want to listen to other people first? Because that's quite a long explanation.
Yeah, I think what's probably useful is if we hear the, if we're okay with that, we hear the the speakers, and then we come back, and then Wendy, before we go into the debate process, Wendy perhaps can then
yeah, that's fine.
Address some of the comments, because there may be other comments through other speakers which are brought up as well. Is there any further questions to officers now? Councillor Brooks.
Just read on here, in a days when we're trying to get children to walk, there's an information that says there is no information on how children could safely access this nursery by walking. Has that been taken into consideration that every single child for safety has to be dropped off in a car?
I'll address that as part of my overall assessment, if that's okay. It's very complicated and very boring, probably. So it's put out, and hopefully it'll encompass anything else that's brought up by any other speakers.
Okay, Councillor Charters, something else not on cards, is it?
It's not on cards, but it's part of Wendy's big, long, boring thing that she's going to say later. Just related to Councillor Brooks' point around walking, I don't see anything mentioned around public transport access, and I know that as someone who was a child once and therefore did go to nursery, I was taken by my mum on the bus. So I just want to know what assessment's been done around public transport, because from what I'm aware, there's not a great public transport offer in that area.
Okay, thanks. Wendy will add that to our list. Is there any other questions at this point? Okay, so now we're going to call the speakers. So the first is the objector, which is Catherine Loftus. So is that you? Okay, welcome. You have 3 minutes to make your statement, and then members will be able to ask you questions. Okay, thank you.
I speak on behalf of the affected local residents to formally request that the Planning Committee reject the application of a 50-place nursery at Hilltop Farm. While residents support high-quality childcare, this specific rural site is entirely inappropriate. The proposal introduces severe highway safety hazards, relies on fundamentally flawed traffic data, and poses a potential risk to both vulnerable road users and emergency services. The local resident survey was a realistic reflection of the network conditions during normal operating periods, with local school traffic and highlights unacceptable impact on highway safety. As local residents, we have a lot of experience and knowledge of the area and understand the congestion this would cause, with adding further to our already congested roads with blind bends and no pavements. This area suffers from heavy cut-through traffic bypass from Middleton Road West to Chadderton Hall Road, morning and afternoon. Peak periods are already chaotic, with school traffic parking on double yellow lines and blocking residential driveways. North Chadderton School has an active application to increase its PAN. The impact of the school expansion alongside a 50-place nursery will push the local network into absolute gridlock. Unlike a rapid drop-off zone, nursery drop-offs require parents to park, unbuckle children and enter the building, taking 5 to 10 minutes per vehicle. If the site's limited parking fills up, working parents under time pressure will inevitably park on narrow lanes, obstructing thoroughfares and driveways. We can see that the new amended walkway to the nursery of the farmyard does not in any way elevate the traffic congestion and does nothing to address the structural dangers of the approach roads and the potential risk to pedestrians, as there is no refuge to stand safely and let cars pass. Hilltop Farm has seen extensive commercial development in recent years, resulting in HGVs entering and leaving at irregular hours. Mixing daily HGV movements with small children and families on narrow single-track lanes creates an unacceptable risk to life. The residents' independent traffic report proves that a standard emergency fire engine cannot physically pass a parked vehicle on these narrow roads. If nursery traffic causes parking overflow, emergency vehicle access will be entirely blocked. The 8 additional parking spaces for the nursery on the proposed new plan, the parking spaces are actually owned by the riding school under the land ownership scheme. So in effect, the nursery does not have any additional parking spaces, as we believe these parking spaces will be on a first-come, first-served basis. The applicants have not provided any extra parking spaces. In conclusion, the proposed development fails to meet the national and local planning policies regarding safe access, sustainable transport and highway safety.
Okay, I'm afraid you're out of time now. If Councillor Nassim, you can extend 30 seconds, yeah? Okay, we'll extend. Agreed?
The red line amendments to the application fail to mitigate the absolute lack of supportive highway infrastructure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for the objector? Okay, thank you for your time. We'll now move on to the applicant. Who is that? Gregory Oldham? Is that you? Okay. So again, you have 3 minutes, and then the committee members can ask any questions. Oh yes, sorry. Could you turn your mic off for me, please? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Greg Oldham, and I am the architect and agent for this application. The application is for the change of use of an existing agricultural building to a 50-place daycare nursery. The applicant, Mrs Hayley Rennie, is a fully qualified childminder with a bachelor's degree in early childhood and education and over 15 years of experience working at private and public schools and nurseries. She currently has a waiting list of 10 children, while parents seeking alternative childcare have reported waiting lists of up to 2 years elsewhere. This reflects a clear shortage of nursery provision across the borough, which has been further exacerbated by the recent closure of an 85-place nursery nearby in Chadderton. The proposed site provides an ideal opportunity to help meet this need. It reuses an existing agricultural building that is currently vacant, requires no extension, and is therefore of little to no detriment to the green belt. The site also sits within a generous curtilage capable of accommodating all necessary outdoor facilities and car parking. I would also like to take this time to address the main concerns raised by residents. Firstly, in relation to traffic and parking, we appointed a professional transport consultant who has demonstrated that the proposal can operate safely. Peak parking demand has been calculated at a maximum of 11 spaces, while the scheme provides 15 on-site spaces, including 6 dedicated pick-up and drop-off bays. Together with staggered arrival and collection times typical of a daycare nursery, this is expected to minimise reliance on on-street parking. Traffic surveys have also confirmed that safe access and appropriate visibility can be achieved from Heights Lane and Kiln Lane, and clearly marked pathways within the site provide safety for pedestrians and drivers alike. Secondly, regarding noise, a detailed acoustic assessment has informed the design. Measures include upgrading the existing building fabric to improve both acoustic and thermal performance, limiting opening windows on the northwest elevation facing neighbouring properties, and providing acoustic screening around the outdoor play area with no more than 15 children outside at any one time. In summary, this proposal brings a vacant building back into productive use and delivers a much needed childcare facility to support families and provide local jobs. The scheme has been carefully designed to address the technical matters raised through professional transport and acoustic assessments, and represents sustainable development. For these reasons, the planning officer has recommended the application for approval, and I respectfully ask the committee to support that recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for the applicant? Okay, Councillor Talbot.
Sorry, you did this staggered system. Have you got a plan for that you can tell the committee this how you're going to do that, please?
So the traffic and transport plan that we had done looked at pick up and drop off trip profiling for these sorts of facilities for 50 pupils, and it concludes that between the hours of 7:30 in the morning, which is the opening times, and 10 a.m. in the morning, this is where all the drop-offs will take place. The peak identified period is between the hours of 8 and 9, when it's expected that you'll have approximately 12 drop-offs going on in the period of an hour. So to put that in perspective, that's about 1 drop-off every 5 minutes, which is probably enough time for 6 spaces, for parents to pull up, take the children out of the cars, get them in nursery, get them settled, get back in the cars and leave.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come back on that?
Yes, so you're relying on parents to be squared away with that and be punctual and because they've got busy lives. How robust is that going to be?
It was based on the trip profiling done by the traffic consultant, which I know real life isn't numbers and figures and charts, but a nursery, you know, you've got different parents working different hours, you've got shift workers, you've got people doing a 9 to 5. At the end of the day, it's not a school. There's no requirement to be there at 9 on the dot and leave at 3:15 on the dot. So it is flexible. You know, some will be dropping off first thing at 7:30. So, you know, we know that there's not going to be 50 children getting dropped off in that car park, you know, at 8:30 on the dot, basically.
Councillor Brooks.
Sorry, can I just go through your number again? You said it starts 7:30 till 10, peaks 8 till 9, and it's 12 cars in that hour, which means that the numbers don't add to 50. Sorry, can you just confirm that? If it's 12 at peak and you've only got 1.5 hours either side, that's a maximum of another 12 or 16. That's 30 odd cars, not 50.
Yeah, I think without the numbers on me, it's hard to answer that, but that is, trust that is what the report says. I think it might even extend to 11 o'clock in the morning. But the numbers are there in the report. It has been assessed thoroughly.
Okay, any further questions to the object, Councillor Sheen?
Thank you. Apologies. No disrespect, I forgot your name. What's your name, sorry?
It's Greg.
Greg, thank you, Greg. You mentioned, and I lost track of my thought. Yes, parking. You say that there are additional parking. However, the objector has said that that parking provision is owned by the riding school. Can you just put some clarification on that so we understand that aspect of it? Thank you.
So I believe that there's an agreement between the owner of the land, who also owns the riding school, and Hayley Rennie, to allow that the parking spaces for riding school to be used during the operational hours of the nursery, which don't coincide with the operational hours of the riding school.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, so the application was called in by former Councillor McLaren and Councillor Brownridge, and Councillor Brownridge would now like to address the committee. Okay, Councillor Brownridge.
Thank you very much, Chair. You won't be surprised to know that I'm focusing on highway issues. I mean, the planning officer and the highway officer sort of implied that, or said that this had been discussed. I think it's really unfortunate that their discussions aren't included in the committee report, because all we've got is there were no highway comments. Now, clearly that's not true, and it's left us a bit of a disadvantage because we don't know what factors have been taken into account. I'm particularly concerned there are significant differences between the traffic assessment provided by the applicant and that provided by the residents in terms of actual existing traffic numbers in the area, and that isn't discussed in the committee report at all, and I think that's a serious omission. I also have an issue about the staffing. I accept the 11 staff is about the right number, but this nursery is open for 10.5 hours a day. A normal working week in this profession is 40 hours. That suggests there will be shift working. It does suggest there will be movement amongst the staff in the daytime. It may not be significant, but it's not mentioned, and that will relate to further movements in the wider area that the officers have referred to. So the main concern is about traffic movements. So the TRIX data that the highway consultants rely on is a good starting point, but it's a theoretical starting point. What it takes is an average of these types of uses across the country. So that gives you a starting point. I would advocate that it doesn't allow for people to take specific issue with what they know happens in a specific area. And this is why the comments of the residents are so important, because they see this on a daily basis. So there was also a criticism that the applicants used what they called an edge of the centre site, and that relies very heavily on pedestrian access, and the target distance is 800 metres or 10 minutes. Now, I accept that that might well work for adults. I don't think any adult would happily say they could walk 800 metres with a preschool child in 10 minutes. Just don't believe that's feasible. It takes hours to walk anywhere with children because they look at everything. Moreover, the site is accessed by a very steep hill with no road markings and no pedestrian facilities. And I think, therefore, it's really unlikely that many parents are actually going to be walking to this unit. The applicant just referred or the agent referred to the fact that this might well have a much wider catchment area anyway, because nursery places are in short supply. So I think we have to conclude that there will be significant traffic use from cars. Reference is made to 2 bus services. Now, there are 2 bus services that sort of serve the area. They don't really serve very much of Chadderton. They're only hourly. The first one is at 8:10 in the morning and the other one's at 8 o'clock. Not really very helpful if you're on your way to work. So I think the idea that there is an alternative to car use is pretty slim. So we've talked a lot about the drop-off places at the north end of the site. Now, I have to say again, as an ex-parent, I suppose I'm still a parent, a grandparent, that really this is predicated on a really brilliant calculation that a car will arrive every 2.5 minutes, or is allowed 2.5 minutes to arrive, and we'll have 5 minutes to disgorge its child and drive off, manoeuvre and drive off again. Now, I accept that not everybody's going to arrive between 8 and 9 in the morning. That's perfectly true. I would predicate that the vast majority of people, there will be a big surge of demand that time in the morning and round about 5 to 6 o'clock at night. And I cannot accept, and having everybody knows what schools are like, even if you provide places for parents, the effort of driving into a site, parking up and then turning round and driving out again defeats most of them. So I think we have to accept that there will be increased on-street car parking in the area, and in fairness the committee report says so. So my concern is that if you look at Heights Lane, where the access, the pedestrian and parking spaces for the parents is, that is a single track road, and it's single track for the whole of its length until you get to the other end, where there's a slight widening out before it narrows again and joins into Crag Road, and the visibility on that section is absolutely appalling. Now, there's no guarantee that if you're driving up and you do use that, you do stop outside the site, it's not unfeasible that you will continue straight on rather than trying to turn round on Heights Lane and get access onto Crag Road. And I would maintain that that needs a real proper assessment of the implications for traffic of that, because the visibility on that stretch of the road is really, really poor. So again,
I'm afraid you're out of time now. Do you want to move extension? Okay.
All right, I haven't got very much more. I mean, the reference was made to parking in the other part of the site. The residents have raised the issue of conflict with existing traffic. You're talking about manoeuvring there right on the part where, again, the pedestrians and potential conflict with the pedestrians. So I think I have really considerable and grave concerns about the highway situation that haven't been answered in the committee report, may have been taken into account, should have been. And I would ask, and I'm not clear about this, that if there isn't a condition requiring those additional spaces to permanently be available for the nursery, then that condition should be added. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll just ask questions for Councillor Brownish first, and then Wendy can come in with the highways issues. Councillor Charters.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor, just regards to the bus services that you mentioned, I know you mentioned about the times. How far away from the site do those buses go? Because I'm not aware of buses going that far up.
My understanding is one parks on Chadderton Park Road and one on Burnley Lane. And then I think one goes up Cathedral Road. So it's at the very bottom of Kiln Hill Lane and back a bit.
Bottom of the hill?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Brooks?
I'm not sure if you're going to answer this or it's in the other one. So these lanes are relatively small. What is the street lighting like? Because 8 o'clock in winter, 3 o'clock in winter is pitch black.
As far as I'm aware, they are lit. The resident would be better able to tell me. I don't really venture up there after dark, but I would take the general point that the access in the winter will be a lot worse. It will be even worse in the winter because it is dark, and obviously if it's slippery, you know that's a pretty nasty road to drive up.
Okay, we're not supposed to. I don't know. Do you want to add anything to that? And that comment? Okay, thank you. Any further questions for Councillor Brownridge? Okay. Now we'll pass on to Wendy, the traffic officer, who will the highways officer, sorry, who will now address hopefully a number of those concerns.
I might jump around a little bit. but if you want to ask me questions at the end, you can ask me questions. So the first thing that's been brought out a little bit is it's being called a school. It isn't a school, it's a nursery. So the drop-off and collection times are staggered throughout the day. We've got to remember that there are no national or local parking standards. So when I look at an application like this, in some areas there doesn't have to be any parking. When I looked at this one, I thought, and this is where we've worked with the applicant, and we do quite a lot of work with the applicant, sort of behind the scenes. It was important here, given the geography and topography of the site, that active travel probably wouldn't, to encourage active travel probably wouldn't be the safest thing for us to do. So I acknowledge that we've got narrow carriageways and no footways. I acknowledge that public transport links to the site are poor, but also people that live in that area will be using public transport. So we're not saying, I can't say absolutely no child will get the bus with their parents who will be looking after them because they're of that age. They're not secondary school children that might not be as vigilant about road safety as a parent holding a small child's hand. So we worked with the applicant to try and get as many car parking spaces as we could, and as I said before, with safe access from them to the building. And then some parents will park on the nearby local highways, but they're required to do that safely and legally. And I can't say every parent is going to park safely and legally, but I can't say every parent isn't going to park safely and legally. So there will be additional traffic and there will be additional on-street parking in some areas.
Okay, questions?
I've got more. That was a deep breath. Right, I'm just going to explain the figures that the applicant submitted. So when you're not used to dealing with things like this, you think there'll be 50 cars in the morning, all arriving at the same time, and 50 cars going back in the evening, all leaving at the same time. What we have to do, we haven't got a crystal ball, and we can't be exact, but the industry standard is something called the TRICS database, and that tells us that in a particular area, for a particular use, there'll be roughly this much traffic, and that's what's been submitted by the applicant. The figures are very low. They were challenged by the residents, and I read that document as well, and I read the applicant's document, and then I make an assessment of the information that I've got. So in the morning, general peak hour, between 8 and 9, there was predicted to be, using our TRICS database, or the TRICS database, 23 additional two-way movements. That's between 8 and 9. In the traditional evening peak, when you'd expect the local highway network to be busier, there were an expected 16 additional two-way traffic movements, so that's to and from the site. I also looked at the period of time between 3 and 4, and that was expected to be an additional 8 two-way movements to and from the site. So in reality, it could be more or it could be less, but this is what we've got to use. So I can't do anything else other than, and the applicant can't, other than use the TRICS database. When we look at interventions and mitigation measures, the figure that we look at is 35 additional vehicle movements. So this is way under that. We also, that some of the information, just to sort of put it into perspective, there are some comments in all the information that we've got that the immediate local highway network is really busy and there's lots of traffic. Traffic counts were carried out. Traffic counts were carried out by the applicant, and traffic counts were carried out by the residents group. In the AM peak, the applicant's recording of traffic between 8 and 9 was 5, and the residents was 9. That is incredibly low. And in the PM peak, the applicant's figure was 6, and the residents' figure was 19. The dates were slightly different. The applicants' figures were between the 11th and the 17th of July, which wasn't school holidays at that point. The school holidays started on the 23rd of July that year. And the residents' figures were between the 15th to the 22nd of September. And as a parent myself, I'm not on either side here, by the way, but as a parent myself, if you're taking your children to school at the beginning of a new term and you've got a new cohort and the parents aren't quite sure how their children are going to be going to school and where they're going to park to drop them off, it is usually slightly busier at the beginning of the school year. And it's conversely less busy at the end of the school year because a lot of the sixth form students and the children that have done their GCSEs aren't on the road. I had to assess it because it's a change of use against the existing use, and that is an agricultural use. So the type of vehicles that could use that piece of land are big, heavy vehicles, including tractors. So it's a little bit of a balance. And you've got the associated employees of whatever they would want to use that site for in association with that. I think I've covered everything. We seem to be saying rapid drop-off zone. That isn't how I've assessed it. It's not a rapid drop-off zone. It's a take your children, park up, get them safely out of the car, take them to nursery, and then come back and drive off. It's not. For some secondary schools, we do have rapid drop-off zones. At Saddleworth, for instance, we expect parents to drive in, drop the children off. They've got a safe place to walk from the car to the pedestrian route to the school, and then the parents drive off. It's completely different. And then the only other thing I'd say is the additional parking at the bottom of the drawing is within the red line, so we have got control. So that has to be provided as part of this application, and that's how we've assessed it.
Okay. So questions to Wendy, Councillor Charters.
Just a comment around the bit right at the beginning of what Wendy said around the active travel and obviously the topography. It's very hilly. I'm just wondering, when we mentioned, you said it wasn't something too much taken into consideration due to topography, but we have put a condition in about cycle storage. So we're not expecting active travel for users of the site, but we are expecting to still have a place for some people, I presume staff, to put the bikes. That just feels a bit incongruent to me that we are considering it for the condition but not for the use of for any other things. Because I mean, I wouldn't want to cycle. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of cycling myself in general, but I wouldn't want to cycle up a single track road with opposing traffic. I wouldn't want to drive up there either, to be honest. I wouldn't want to walk. I wouldn't want to go up there. But specifically, if you are a cyclist on a bike, you are quite vulnerable. So if we are mandating cycling storage, but then also saying, but we're not expecting anyone to cycle up there, it just feels a bit incongruent.
So when I said that about looking at the provision of a nursery there, and if the parking provision was low or if there wasn't parking provision anywhere else, I would then look at active travel options, and we want to encourage people to walk and cycle. In this case, when I said active travel probably wasn't the safest option here. It was more for the children and the parents. But there will still be some children and parents that will walk it. And I've walked roads like that with my children. The cycle storage, we do have sustainable transport policies, and that is one of them. So if we provide cycle storage, it was when I asked for the condition to be attached, it was more for staff, and a lot of people do actually enjoy cycling up hills. Not. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity of us asking for it to be provided if it would have some benefit for some users. But obviously I'm not expecting 3-year-olds to cycle up the hill to the nursery.
Chair, I'm just going to be really cheeky and just quickly come back because I don't think you mentioned any of the questions I asked around the buses and public transport.
I thought I had mentioned buses, but perhaps I didn't. So I also acknowledge that the nearest public transport links are a way away, and again that would be something I'd look at if there was little or no car parking provision, because again we want to encourage people to use more sustainable modes of transport. So that's sort of linked to, you could get the bus, but then you would have to walk up the narrow lanes, and that's not what we're necessarily advocating. So what I had to do in order for it to be provided, it could either be, we could either say yes, we think children can gain access safely to the nursery, or we could refuse it for highway safety reasons, because they can't travel safely by public transport and then walk up the hill. Some children will still be taken in that way, but I had to concentrate in this instance on the fact that I expect most parents would want to drive to that site, and then I had to make sure that once they've driven there, they can get their children from their car safely to the building.
Councillor Tarbuck?
Yes, you mentioned about the Saddleworth School rapid drop-off. Can you be specific which school you got in mind there? Because my children go to a Saddleworth school, and there is a roundabout that they are expected to park and drop off. There's a nursery there, and a primary and a junior school there. And what tends to happen is fathers will park there and start with a little chinwag, which then delays it, which causes a parish roundabout situation. Also, what tends to happen is parents get there for 2:30 to try and get a parking spot, and that happens. And most of the schools I know of in Saddleworth, everyone is a nightmare.
Peter.
I just want to come in on that first of all, because obviously we've got to focus on the application in hand. Wendy mentioned the Saddleworth example as what we're not talking about here. It's not a rapid drop-off pot here. So I think we just maybe could we draw it back to this application, and that's a separate matter where we can pick up elsewhere. Thank you.
Yeah, I really refrain from saying I know what you mean about that, but obviously it is a different application. Councillor Brooks.
Yeah, I've got a couple of points. So you're saying that the matrix is 20. Now, 50 cars over 2.5 hours, every 3 minutes is 23, I think you said. So in peak hour, every 3 minutes, if it was perfect, is 50 cars over 2.5 hours is 20 anyway. So peak, we're saying is only 3 cars more than average. Our numbers don't add up to me. So we're saying 7 till 10 o'clock is the time, 2.5 hours. 50 cars over 2.5 hours is 20 cars per hour in my head. But we're saying at peak it's 23. That was the first one. The second one is those tests have been conducted in July and September, where it's bright lights, less cars. In winter, those roads are narrow, it's pitch black. Has there anything been put in that what will change in that time? Because it's significant around schools I'm at that night times in winter are far, far more worse than in summer because of the walking, which there is no safe walking. It feels like the whole highways piece has been done at a time that sort of is the prime time for a good survey and not injunction of all year round.
So the surveys, we can't, if a planning application is submitted in, I don't know, August or September, we can't say, well, actually, we're not accepting that because you haven't carried your traffic counts out exactly when we want. It's nothing to do with light or dark or anything like that. We've got to be realistic about when the surveys are carried out. And you've actually got, we don't usually have two counts at such different times of the year, and there is a difference between traffic at the end of July or mid-July and the beginning of September. So I think that is actually quite robust. So the fact that the residents did that is a positive, because it gives us a clearer picture. Right, I'll go back to the TRICS database again. The 23 two-way movements were within the hour of between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. I haven't written the figures down here for the others, but it's just to illustrate, and it won't be 23 every single day. Sometimes it will be more and sometimes it will be less. It just gives us an idea. It's a tool that gives us an idea of how much traffic there's likely to be. And I'll reiterate, it's 35 vehicle movements. That means that we have to look at what action is required. Not necessarily do we have to provide a mitigation measure, but is there going to be a problem? And sometimes there isn't, depending on the situation. And this is borough-wide on lots of different types of developments. So, have I answered all of your questions there? I might not have said what you want to hear, but have I answered everything that you asked me?
So that survey is done on a standard single carriageway with 2 lanes, not a single lane. That was my last question. So the TRICS report is carried out on a standard road with access of both sides being a single lane and not on a single lane road. Is that fair to say?
It is, but it's traffic generation. It's not whether they can pass or anything like that. And they can, because I also looked at the accident data. And so we look at killed and seriously injured. So if people think that there might have been near misses, that isn't included in the data. There are no accidents in that area, because that's one of the things that I looked at as part of the assessment. So the traffic generation doesn't really apply to whether it's single lane or two-way running.
Okay, any more questions on highways, Councillor Nashim?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, Randy. What enforcement actions will be applied for unlegal parking? And especially with it being a nursery, and with it being obviously having up to 50 students there, emergency access will be vital. So if you've got people doing those drop-offs and parking illegally, and you can't get a fire engine up there or an emergency service, I think that would be very concerning on those lanes, because I've been up those lanes many a times. Thank you.
So I've already said about expecting people to park safely and legally. And I know that doesn't always happen, but even if we put waiting restrictions down, which would impact on residents outside of these times, parents tend to ignore them. Enforcement action is difficult because it's for short term. It's short term, which is, again, even though there are no national or local parking standards, why the only way that I wouldn't recommend refusal on this site was if parking provision was if parking spaces were provided. So enforcement will happen in exactly the same way as it does everywhere else in the borough. It won't be anything over and above what we do throughout the borough. I'm sort of repeating myself now. If we were looking at restrictions, they'd be ignored anyway. So we're expecting also, parents have got small children. You'd expect them to have a little bit of courtesy for other parents with small children and park safely. And I do think that with the parking provision we've got that big wide area at the bottom of the drawing as well, which is, if I was a parent, that is where I'd be parking.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Butts, is there a question for Wendy?
Yes, it's just to come back on the risk assessment. So risk assessment is carried out on current conditions. A new risk assessment would be the probability of it happening with the increased number of people is going to be far greater, and the potential of higher risk with being younger children is much higher. So the risk assessment must surely go up quite considerably when you're considering this.
When you say risk assessment, do you mean the assessment that I carried out of the application? Is that what you mean?
I do, yeah. So yeah. I'm actually CHAPS and IOSH risk assessment. Yeah. So yeah, so the probability times the condition times the amount of times it happened will increase significantly on this road with younger children, no safe parking, no safe walking, and so the possibility is going to be far increased on a new risk assessment carried out than it is on an original one of the residents there.
There is safe parking because we've made sure that there is safe parking and the children can be taken from their cars to the building safely. So there is safe parking. The TRICS database tells us that there's an additional 23 two-way movements in the peak hour of the morning between 8 and 9. So yes, the risk of accident could go up, but it's not an unsafe environment now if we're looking at the accident data, because there have been no accidents. So you could say that the geometry and topography now is you slow down. When I drive up there, I'm not going at probably even 30 miles an hour. I've slowed right down, so that sort of is a built-in safety feature.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Before we move on, I'm just going to bring Peter in, who's got a couple of comments before we move on to the next stage.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say this has been a really healthy debate. In terms of highways is a very important matter on most applications, and certainly on this application. So I think it's been really good to discuss it all and bring it all through. I wanted to just do two things, kind of recap very simply what Wendy's been putting forward, because I like to make things simple and boil it down to what is the crucial issue. But then also, obviously, because Wendy's a highways engineer, that's her role, that's what we consult her for, we have to take that advice in the balance in a planning decision and put a kind of a planning perspective on it as well. So I'll come to that as well. So firstly, in terms of just recapping, if we were to do a hypothetical worst case scenario in this development, we're talking about assessment side staff, obviously, because for a moment they would tend to come earlier. In terms of the 50 children that is the maximum this nursery would have, and then assuming they're all being dropped off by car, and because it's a nursery, even in the worst case scenario, you're probably talking over a 2-hour window from 7:30 to 9:30. In a worst case scenario, it won't even be that; it'll be spread longer. But let's take the worst case. So that's 50 vehicles over 120 minutes. That's not even one vehicle every 2 minutes. And we've required a drop-off area that has 7 parking bays, 7 parking bays in there. So even allowing for a slightly longer drop-off of your child than I would have done when my children were younger, there is plenty of space and time for vehicles to come, drop off their child and exit again. In terms of then, when we move on to things like the impact on the highway and the safety, that's crucial because those numbers, less than 1 car every 2 minutes, are not significant from a highways point of view. I know not everyone might like to hear that, but that is the facts of the matter. In terms of that's why we do the TRICS assessments and the highway assessments that we do. We are having to look from a planning point of view. When we assess this application, we're not assessing the existing issues of the road. We're not assessing the existing congestion, if there were any, though there isn't any in this case. We're assessing what is the additional impact of this development. And we're talking about less than one car every 2 minutes. So crucially on that point, and this is where the planning bit comes in, paragraph 116 of the National Planning Policy Framework gives a really clear, concise position on what we as planners and you as a committee and decision makers have to consider on highways matters in an application like this. It says development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network following mitigation would be severe, taking into account all reasonable future scenarios. So the national policy sets quite high boundaries there. Unacceptable impact on highway safety and severe impacts on the local road network. And quite frankly, a development of this size is not going to do that. So I think we have to bear that in mind in terms of as you move towards putting forward motions and making decisions. Wendy is the professional highways engineer. She has given her very clear advice. We as planners have taken that on board, tested it against the NPPF paragraph 116 and found that it doesn't meet those thresholds. Hence why we, from a highways point of view at least, we feel comfortable that we can recommend this for refusal and for approval, sorry. And of course, with all the other matters in planning as well that we've considered and we feel it's acceptable for approval. So please bear that in mind as you deliberate and come to a conclusion, because again, if you do ultimately decide to refuse, you've got to have reasonable grounds that can be defended by one of you, because it's against our recommendation. One of you would have to defend it at appeal. And if we fail to do that reasonably, there will be costs against us in a scenario like this. So we have to be mindful of that, and setting aside costs, we have to make the right decision based upon the planning policy and legislation.
Okay, with that in mind, we'll move to the wider debate now. Councillor Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. So, my perspective, the nursery itself is welcomed, as I understand that there's a need in that area. However, the access to and from the building safely, parking manoeuvres, including access for emergency service, it's concerning. What I would like at this stage is propose a condition, because that bottom car park, you're sharing it with the horse riding school. Whilst the nursery is open, and that means Monday to Friday or any variations of any opening times in the future, that the nursery has pure access to that.
Okay.
That's my proposal on that. Thank you.
Peter will come in a second and see whether that is make comment on that. I'll just deal with it.
So, on the late list, there is an additional condition that we had proposed, which reads, the car parking areas shown on the approved plans shall be provided prior to the first use of the development, made available at all times, and retained thereafter for the lifetime of the development. Is that sufficient for you, or do you want something more? Okay.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Any more questions, comments? Okay, Councillor Charters.
So just on that last thing that Peter's just mentioned there, I don't think that condition actually satisfies what Councillor Najim was asking, because it just says that the car park will be provided and made available at all times, but I think your concern was it being used outside of the times the nursery is being open. Correct. So if it's available at all times, that means that it could be being used outside of that time, therefore it's going to generate more vehicle movements if it's being used for other businesses on the site, not for the nursery. So that's just, I think, something that was what you meant there. So I think what the proposal might be, and I think I'm happy to say this, is that the condition should be substituted to be similar to the condition that's above on the late list. It says the car parking areas should only be open at the times that the nursery is open. I think is what you were trying to say. Is that, am I right?
Yeah. I think we need to be careful there, because obviously there is already businesses and riding school, for example, on the site. They use those parking spaces. For example,
so they're already in use. They're not. That's not additional.
Let me finish. Obviously, a riding school typically isn't going to be having a lot of customers during nursery school hours, is it?
No.
So I think it's recognising that there is a trade-off there. So I think we can't, because it's already there and in use for business.
I wasn't aware it was in use.
At other times, it's difficult for us to restrict it just to those hours of operation for the nursery.
Okay, Wendy's just going to come in first before.
I did mention this before. That area where we've just got that number of parking spaces at the bottom of the drawing, that is quite a large area, so you can get additional parking on there, and that would be for the riding school.
I thought that was an additional space. I didn't think it was already in use, so I think that's what we were trying to ascertain there.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so that's the area.
Okay. Is that okay, Josh? Yeah, okay. Right, Councillor Brooks.
Well, sorry, Peter. The peak times at riding schools are pre-school and just after school, because my wife runs a riding school, riding things, and it's exceptionally busy when they're putting the horses out before they go to work and drop kids off. And as soon as they pick children up, they go back to the riding school to bring the horses in and feed. So actually, the peak times are relatively similar to a nursery, because I've seen it every day.
Okay, thank you. Councillor.
Could we refuse it on the Greenbelt policy? There was a suggestion there, building on the Greenbelt. Have we looked at that? Planning policy strongly restricts inappropriate development in Greenbelt. So you would justify building in this location.
Okay, Peter.
So, obviously, I'm not going to say you should, because we've already recommended for approval. But to kind of help you shape your thoughts on if you did want to propose a reason for refusal on Greenbelt, ultimately, the change of use of the building is perfectly acceptable in the Greenbelt. Greenbelt is one of the exceptions about development in the Greenbelt. You can take an existing building and convert it to a different use without impacting the Greenbelt. So the only development, if you like, that impacts potentially on the purposes of the Greenbelt is the fact that some hard standing will be created for the playground and a little bit for the drop-off area and what have you. As I said earlier in response to Councillor Charter's question, while that is an impact on the Greenbelt, in the context of he's talking about surfacing only, there's nothing above ground level that's kind of impacting on the openness, the visual openness of the Greenbelt. As officers, we would say that's not a significant impact on the Greenbelt in this context, but obviously, in terms of the fact that they could, this building could be used and is used already in different ways. Having a small area next to it of hard standing is not particularly unreasonable. And could easily be done. For example, part of the existing use is a B8 use, which is a warehousing. So it could be used for small storage area, and it'd be quite reasonable in that context for an applicant to say, well, I just need a little bit of more hard standing to help serve that, and be very unlikely that we would be able to refuse that. So I think it's recognise it in the context of that just a little bit of hard standing is not going to have a significant impact on the Greenbelt, and so I wouldn't recommend that as a reason for refusal.
Yeah, I'll just make my point. Obviously, I'm very much generally against building in the Greenbelt and advocating, talked a lot in these meetings about that, but I think, the amount of what we're talking about there, I think on those grounds would be really difficult. Is there any other questions, comments? Okay, do we have a proposer? Okay, nobody? Right, okay, I'm going to propose that the application is approved subject to the conditions. We'll have a seconder. Thank you. Okay, all those in favour? Those against? That's 3. Okay, and abstentions? Okay, so that's carried. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll have a short adjournment so the public can leave. Thank you for your attendance and your assistance tonight. Okay, councillors, you'll just... You ready to move on? Okay, thank you. You'd like to take your seat, thank you.
Just tell James to sit down.
Yeah, go and sit down, James.
Oh, James, and sit down. Oh.
The youngsters won't get
they won't get that, will they?
I get it. I get it. Yeah. Okay, so the next application would normally be obviously delegated, but the applicant has declared that he's a relative of an elected member. Therefore, that's why that's come to committee tonight. So we'll move on to the officer, which I can't see who it is. Oh, it's Sophie again. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. This application's for conversion of lower ground floor and first floor of an existing building at 45 to 49 Rippenden Road in Oldham. The ground floor is to be proposed, basement and ground floor is to be proposed as office space, and the first floor is proposed to be a 5-bed house in multiple occupation with a new access staircase. The site is highlighted in red on screen, and the application is being presented to the committee because the applicant is related to Councillor Garfor. This is a more in detail proposed site plan showing the site and the hard standing proposed down the side of the site, linking to the rear to provide access upstairs to the HMO. The site is not allocated in the local plan proposals map, and it is within a mixed use area. These are the proposed elevation plans for the development. So the ground floor will receive a new shop front to the right hand side, and the central and left hand side will be upgraded. Towards the rear there'll be a new access staircase serving the HMO, and there will be security measures, CCTV and lighting down this hard standing area for safe access for residents. This slide shows the proposed floor plans. All HMO bedrooms comply with our HMO standards, which are shown on here, with individual measurements shown on the floor plans. And these are photographs from the site visit a couple of months ago. So you've got the front elevation is currently vacant. Its last use was a care office for residential care and a former dog groomers. And this is photographs from the rear, with some work being taken place at the time I was there visiting. That's the end. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions? Councillor Charles.
Thanks, Chair. I've actually got a lot of concerns around this application because I think there's a lot of information missing from the report. So in the site description it mentions there's some residential properties nearby on Rippenden Road and Shrewsbury Street. You've also got a number of properties on Vulcan Street, just a bit to the north of the site. You've also got the quite a lot of properties on the other side of Rippenden Road, a little more with the flats and other properties there. I've also noticed that there's no consultee from Greater Manchester Police. I know that a lot of concerns from residents on HMOs are around antisocial behaviour. And we know in this area in particular, antisocial behaviour has been a significant concern from Greater Manchester Police. Obviously, they had Operation Vulcan there for the last 12 months. And finally, another issue I've noted is it mentions around does not benefit from any off-road parking. So as far as I'm aware, because I am a resident about half a mile north of this site, there is some sort of parking bays in front of the site. But what I would say is that it's not really a safe location for vehicles to be there. Sorry. It's not really a suitable place for multiple vehicles to be parked. There is, as I said, there is shops there. There's a pub there a bit further down. Parking is at a premium on Rippenden Road in that area, and also I know we've spoken about this in previous applications around HMOs. I think it was the one in Royton. We had a lot of concern around this. I don't see that there's been any assessment of HMOs in the local area. I know of a fair few in the Durker area that are very, very close to this, and I'm just concerned that the concentration there is something that should have been addressed in the report. And at the moment, I'm quite concerned that this report doesn't really give the members of the committee enough information to make a decision.
Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with some of your points. I think, first of all, we have to remember that a HMO is a residential use. So when we're looking at the reason for raising what uses are around it and what have you, is about either the impact of a residential use on the surrounding uses or the impact of the surrounding uses on the residential use that was being proposed. So the fact that there are houses on Vulcan Street and, for example, what have you, that's not really the point, because they're far enough away that visually and amenity-wise, from a residential...
It's just that you've mentioned houses on the street that's on the other side of Rippenden Road from Vulcan Street, which is Shrewsbury Street, but not the houses on the same side of the road. It feels like you're giving an incomplete picture. I'm not saying that's good or bad in either way in terms of what you just said there. I'm just saying there's an incomplete picture for members of the committee, and it could give a misleading view of what's happening there, and I think there's some omissions there that needed to be addressed. That's why I raised it.
We'll take them away in terms of as a review for future reports. I mean, I would say in this case, I think in terms of that particular issue, obviously the properties on Vulcan Street, I'm looking at Street View at the moment, as you haven't guessed. There isn't a line of sight to the Vulcan Street properties. There is a line of sight to some of the properties on Shrewsbury Street. So that's why we look at it in that way. In terms of some of the other issues you raised about Greater Manchester Police, for example, not being consulted. So I am well aware that there are perceptions and concerns around HMOs in terms of antisocial behaviour, but as you're aware from previous committees where we've had HMOs in planning, we have to be clear that we cannot prejudge the behaviour of an occupier of any type of residential property. And as I've said, I know you will have heard me say this before, and not everyone's sat on committee before, but you can have a occupier of a privately owned house who is a nightmare neighbour and is antisocial. So it's not about the fact it's a HMO, it's about individual behaviour, and we can't control that in place.
If it helps, Peter, any application in that area, I would be saying, why have we not consulted Greater Manchester Police?
Okay. And there was a third point that I've slipped my mind now in terms of what you originally said.
Parking.
Oh, concentration.
Concentration, yeah.
So yeah, I think here, in terms of the number of HMOs in Durka particularly, this part of Durka, from recollection of the data, there isn't a particularly huge concentration compared to some parts of the borough, and nowhere in the borough has a overly significant concentration, as we've talked about before in terms of reports to council. I appreciate what you're saying. Maybe it would have been helpful to have had that information about precisely how, because obviously we have a draft policy in the new local plan that will, in a situation like this, will draw a circle around the HMO of a certain distance and count how many HMOs are in that circle. So again, we'll take that away in terms of future applications. We'll make sure.
Just while you mentioned that bit, am I right in thinking that we are able to take into consideration things in the draft local plan? Not necessarily use it as a... I thought we could still reference it, but...
Once we submit,
right,
and we haven't submitted it yet, it can start to be given weight.
Okay.
The weight we give it depends upon how far through the examination it is and what the inspector has said about it so far. So I think we'd probably want to get through the hearings of the examination first and hear some of the feedback from the inspector before we start to give significant weight to it.
Okay, thank you. Just before I bring you in, so I think on 8.2 it says in the public consultation, it says in response no comments have been received. Did that remain the same at the end of the consultation period? Okay, no, okay, fine. Okay, who was it? Councillor Jackson? Huh?
Yeah, I'm just asking. I was looking on Google Maps Street View of the side of the building, and are you saying that they're having access to the side of the building to the upstairs bit? I was quite unsure about that, because it seems like a small alleyway. So where it says Hartland, so the building and access into that alleyway, because if you see on Google Maps, there's not much space there anyway. I was going to ask, is that accessible for the shops behind, so therefore they're taking access away? See this here, yeah, so they're taking access away. Is that access for the back of the shops that they're now going to be eating into? Is that their land or is it not?
Half of it shown on the location plan is owned by the applicant. The other half of it's owned by the council. So the section that they've shown here is what they own. The other half of it outside of that site is all council owned. So the bit that they have got available, they're proposing to hard put hard surfacing down to provide access, safe access to the rear, so that the people can go up the steps to the back into the HMO that way.
Has it got like a covenant on it for access for the other shops behind?
As far as I'm aware, there was no covenant when I looked at it. I wouldn't be able to say for certain, but I did look at the documents and I did have a sight from them, the estates team. But yeah, this section of it here I've seen hard copy of the land registry, and it is in their ownership, so they are able to use that for access.
Well, I'm just concerned if it restricts access to around the back for the shops. That was my main point.
Wendy's going to come in now, yeah.
If they're providing a hard standing, it'll be a continuation of the other piece, whatever the surfacing is of the rest of the passage. So you'll actually improve access if the shops do have the owners of the shops do have vehicular rights along that. So they
won't be able to fence it off or anything.
They haven't said that they will fence it off, and if the status of it is either it's not an adopted highway, but if it's an unadopted highway, or if it's a passage with rights along it, those rights remain regardless of what the surfacing is. So they'll still be able to gain access, is what I'm saying in English.
Okay, thank you. Peter, did you want to come in before I bring you in?
Just a point of clarity. I mean, so when we're looking at a planning application, we have to assess things like access on the physical. Is what they're proposing an acceptable access from the physical development and what have you? So that's fair enough to look at. Just in terms of a point of clarity, when it comes to ownership or rights of access or covenants, we can't take that account into planning. That's a separate thing, if you like. You know, we have to take the development on face value, the proposal, and say, is that access physically capable of being achieved, and does it meet the needs of an access for this development? If subsequently, or even if we do know that there is not a right of access or something like that, that's a separate civil matter that whoever developed the scheme, if they got permission, would have to work through with whoever does own that access. So I've not been as clear as I'd like there, but hopefully that makes some sense. Just to
I understand. I get it. I get the point.
Okay, yeah, go on, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. When it comes to HMOs, where are they going to have the bins, and front, back, access-wise? Because sometimes that bit gets overlooked and then they just put them outside. On the street, yes.
The floor plan here shows bin storage near the staircase and across the courtyard. Can you see that clearly?
Okay, any further questions to officers? Okay, we're going to the wider debate. Any comments? Do we have a proposal? Proposal approved. Do we have a seconder? Okay, I will second that. Those in favour? And those against? Okay, so that is lost.
Can I move refusal?
So you can move refusal. Can you state the planning grounds you would like to move refusal?
Yeah, because luckily I did.
Oh, sorry. I thought it'd come up from over there. Sorry, Josh.
No, I actually did some homework on this one. So, contrary to, I think it's policy 11 of the local plan, there isn't actually any demonstration that this would not add to the harm of HMOs under our Article 4 direction. So I think until we have the information that says this will not increase the amount of HMOs in the area under our Article 4, I think we can't approve this without knowing if it will or will not add to a demonstrable harm, which is why we introduced the Article 4 in the first place, and why we've had a number of applications that have come to this committee that have been either deferred or there's been a lot of issues because we've not had that information, and I think that members of this committee need that information to be able to make an informed decision.
Okay, so first a point of clarity. The Article 4 direction, all it does is require smaller HMOs of 3 to 6 beds to apply for planning permission rather than permitted development. That is separate from any consideration around, as you're talking about, concentration or accumulation of HMOs in a given area. So I wouldn't use the Article 4 as part of any reason. Secondly, if it's about further information that you would like, I would suggest rather than a straightforward refusal, even though, as you know, I don't always like them, I would recommend you propose a deferral, asking for that information to be provided and this application to be brought back with that information.
I'm happy to propose that if there's a member who would second the deferral.
Okay, Councillor Dorrock. Okay, all right. Those in favour of deferral? Those against? Abstentions? Okay, that's carried. So the application is deferred. Okay, and then the final item tonight is appeals. There's one particular appeal I'm very pleased about, so I'll let Martin come in on that.
Thank you, Chair. So just a quick update and a bit more information perhaps because of some new members. So the last agenda item on the Planning Committee agenda is the Planning Appeals update. There's no decision required on it, it's simply for noting. And essentially it's just a list of all of the applications that are currently either subject of a live appeal with the planning inspectorate, so decisions we've made for refusal where an appeal has been made to the planning inspectorate, and of course any decisions that they've made on appeals in the period at the top of the report. So in this particular period there have been 5 dismissed appeals, which means that the inspector has sided with our reason for refusing them, and we've had 3 new appeals submitted. So at each month we bring a report back, it'll just update that situation.
Okay, thank you, and I'm very glad to see that Clough Manor Road Devonshire has their appeal has been dismissed.
And can I just join in that because I'm very pleased to see that the Ancliffe Rise one has been dismissed as well. And I believe it might be a similar issue that you've been dealing with, Garth. So
absolutely,
good to see that.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you for your attendance tonight. The meeting's now closed.